Good morning, friends. In the 9th episode of the story of the storyteller, and as I suspected, our naked emperor has started a new story to fool all of us and pull the minds of the gullible Indians from this COVID disaster where we have lost more than 36,000 lives and nearly 17 lakhs have been affected by COVID. The new story started with entry of Rafael, but in reality, the plan of this new story was the National Educational Policy 2020. The storyteller knows that today whole of India has come to know that Modi has failed in handling COVID crisis. Stop. As we all know, friends, the Union Cabinet has passed the NEP without the National Educational Policy going through the Parliament and a debate happening in the Parliament. Parliament is the supreme body in the democracy. But Modi has bypassed the Parliament. Now let us understand why this urgency that Modi bypassed Parliament and passed in NEP in the Cabinet. What was the hidden agenda? Was this the priority when the whole country is suffering with COVID and families are losing their dear ones in this COVID epidemic? Or is it a hidden agenda to impose Sanskrit and Hindi or non-Hindi speaking states in this country? So basically what we will do is, in a nutshell, we will understand what this NEP is all about, what are the merits, if at all, if any, and what are the demerits, and how it will affect as common people or students in particular. Let us look at the NEP's vision. They say equitable education and providing high quality education to all. Please underline equitable education. Second vision is develop respect towards fundamental rights and constitutional values. And they also say bonding with one's country and its values. The third vision says to instill skill, value dispositions that support commitment to human rights. Please underline human rights. When we look at the principles in general of this National Educational Policy, it says respect for diversity and local content, equity and inclusion and community participation, and use of technology. Now let us see, the first vision, equitable education. When you look at equitable education, today, there are thousands and thousands of government schools across the country. There are private schools also run by corporates. There are Kendriya Vidyalayas and Navodaya schools also. Nowhere in National Educational Policy document it says that a uniform, equitable education will be given to all children in this country. The government schools remain. The private schools also run by corporates remain. Then where is equity? When both remain, is the education standards or the infrastructure in government schools equal to a private school or a school run by corporates? Forget schools run by corporates. As NEP vision said something about saying that all government schools in this country will be brought on par with a Navodaya Vidyalaya or Kendriya Vidyalaya, which will lead to real equitable education in this country. In short, NEP talks about universalization of education, right from foundation education to secondary education. Now what the NEP has done is, earlier it was 10+2 system. Now what it has done is, it has divided foundation, that is, from 3 to 9 years, 3 years of kindergarten, which will be run by Anganwadis. First standard and second standard, 6 to 8 years, that is called foundation course. The preparatory course is from 3rd standard to 5th standard, 8 to 11 years of age. And middle school is from 6 to 8th standard, that is from age 11 to 14. And the last 4 years is from 9 to 12th standard, that is secondary education. This is called as ECCE, early childhood care education of nearly 5 years, preparatory education of around 2 years, 3 years of middle education, and 4 years of secondary education. Now they say that universalization or access to ECC to secondary will be done through NEP. Now what we have to understand is, in this NEP, you have to ignore the printed lines, whatever are there, in this NEP. But the hidden lines, or the, vacant lines, or the, white paper lines which is vacant, has to be understood by people. This is where the hidden agenda of the Modi government is for saffronization of primary and secondary education. While NEP says about universalization, it is going to eradicate rote learning, there will be interdisciplinary flexibility, but what I fear is autonomy of university will be gone, removal of reservation in all types of education will be suspect, privatization of education will happen through modernization of education, hidden agenda will be implemented, that is saffronization of education through modernization, through the mask of modernization of education will be done by this Modi government. And friends, if National Education Policy's own vision, equitable education and providing higher education to all, does it happen? With privatization and commercialization of education, most of the corporates led by Ambani and Adani sort of corporate cronies will enter the educational sector. They will commercialize the education, which will lead to higher fees for all the students. Lot of marginalized sections from OBC, Dalits, and especially the poorer sections will be deprived of basic education. With this, is this equity education for all? When poor students can't afford primary education, secondary education, and NEP at no level says that government takes the responsibility of education for all at subsidized rates, can this be called a national educational policy? Hence, its own vision, NEP's own vision number 1 doesn't satisfy. Let us look at the second vision. Develop respect towards fundamental rights and constitutional values. Modi himself has not respected the constitution. As we all know, friends, education comes under the constitution's concurrent list. The national educational policy should have taken concurrence of the states, of all the states in this country, including the parliament. But has Modi and the BJP government followed its own vision, showing respect for the fundamental rights and constitutional values in this country? No. Hence, this NEP, National Educational Policy, fails its own litmus test of its vision number 1 and 2. Let me come to the vision number 3, instill skills, values and disposition that supports commitment to human rights. When 60-70% of the rural population or the marginalized sections have no access to basic education on par with the universal education that NEP provides. No, is this commitment to human rights, my dear friends? There are, of course, few merits in this new educational policy. One of the merit is increase of RTE from 14 years to 18 years. This is one good thing. But my dear friends, you all know what is happening with RTE in the existing situation. There are lakhs of students who have no access to education in good schools today. And we all know RTE has failed to a large extent these last 6 years. Therefore, friends, this new educational policy looks at progressive changes, but a clear plan on how to implement has been lacking. Let us look at what Kothari Commission said in 1960. And every subsequent commissions, on educational policy have been telling this. They have asked every government to keep 6% of their GDP on central spending, 6% of their GDP on education. Every subsequent commission has asked to spend 10% of the annual budget on education. But look at the progress report of this Modi government. In fact, for the last 6 years, the Modi government has been reduced considerably, from UPA times. In fact, I have some, investment on research and innovation has come down from 0.84 of the GDP in 2008 to 0.6 in 2018. In India today, there are just 15 research students out of every 1 lakh, while in China, it is nearly 111 students per 1 lakh. Is it universal education for all? Is this what the national educational policy should have looked in, instead of a policy, framing a policy in a hurry which doesn't have the concurrence of the people of India and all the elected bodies like Parliament and state assemblies. In educational policy, the Modi government says they're going to bring in 2 crore students under the gross enrollment ratio GER into education. There are crores and crores of students who are already in substandard environment. Most of the Kothari Commission and most of the commissions have said the teacher to student ratio should be 30:1. But in the existing government schools, the student ratio to teacher ratio is somewhere around 90:1, and somewhere around 120:1. Has this national educational policy gone into depth to increase, to make amendments in the student teacher ratio? Have they made any provision to increase to give better infrastructure to the existing students who are already there, crores of students? For the existing students, you are not able to do anything, and you are having big ideas of bringing 2 crore children who are out. Yes, bringing them back to mainstream is very important. But what is that you have outlaid in this national educational policy for the existing ones? Let me tell you, friends, GDP of Modi is keeping on decreasing right from 2014. Earlier GDP, which was 8%, today is at a dismal 5.5% average. And if you look at the changed GDP calculation, it is not even 5.5%, it should be somewhere around 4% if you take the Manmohan Singh type of calculation of GDP. In one way, the GDP is declining, and the spend on education on the decreased GDP also is decreasing. In 2012-13, UPA spent around 3.1% of the GDP on education. Today, in 2015-16, it has fallen to 2.4% in this Modi government. So when Modi has a history of reduced public spending or government spending on education, how can he spend 6% on education which he promises in the new educational policy? Does this mean, is this also a jumla? Is he 6% spend on national educational policy is from the government, or is he expecting the private corporate cronies of his to invest in this 6% so that they take a pie of their investment in return? Point, friends, is in this new educational policy, they say GER in higher education, gross enrollment ratio, they're going to move up from 26.5% in 2018 to 50% in 2035. Nowhere they have said how. When you want to take such a leap, in that case, you should have 6% of your GDP for education or 10% of your annual budget for education. But has it been done? Nowhere it is clear. They say 6%, but there is ambiguity. We don't know how this 6% will be made of. When today the governments are spending 2.8 to 3% or lesser than that, the Modi government is spending much lesser than that. Does this mean that the private players or the corporate cronies are going to invest as part of this 6% in this higher education? Doesn't this mean commercialization of education? When these commercial corporate cronies invest in education, will they invest it for free? Will they not take their pound of flesh? I was astonished when Modi said, no, the universities in fact can borrow money. This clearly says that Modi is going to reduce spending on education. When this government is hell-bent on reduced spending on education, how they can implement this highly ambiguous national educational policy is my question. Now when these corporate cronies invest, will they invest it for free? Or when the universities go to take loans with these corporate cronies, will this Ambani who gives 10 crores to a university will not demand his pound of flesh from these universities? Will it not lead to these universities keeping their land and building as collateral with these funding agencies? There is also a mention of board of governors for these universities. Will not these political appointments of this board of governors make way or pave way for saffronization of education in this country? Is this not a hidden agenda of this National Educational Policy 2020? In fact, my dear friends, in this National Educational Policy, Modi should have looked at CSS, Common School System. It could have ensured uniform school system for all students, irrespective of caste, creed, income. But NEP failed to implement a common school system. It speaks of equity, but it's farce. It's fake. There is no equity at all. If there was equity, uniform education schools should have been for across all sections of children. But it is not. Government schools, marginalized children will get different education, while people who have money can go to Adani and Ambani schools. Is this equity? Is this uniformity? Modi government speaks of uniformity. BJP and RSS wants uniform one country. They speak of, uniform civil code. They speak of, one election. They speak of so many oneness. They want a centralized system. But why don't they speak of a uniform educational system in a national educational policy? In fact, it's a shame on Modi. Under the national educational policy, 2 power centers have been created. One for primary education and secondary education up to class 12. 4 ministries have been included. Ministry of Human Resource Development, Ministry of Social Welfare, Ministry of Tribal Welfare, and one more. While for higher education, a HECI named regulatory body has been formed. It is Higher Education Commission of India. It's a regulatory body which is supreme, which is centralized, and as per me, it is constituted to control education industry in this country. It will be a body which will by default implement the hidden agenda of RSS and BJP, and also the hidden agenda of commercialization and privatization of Indian educations to the Ambanis and Adanis who fund BJP's election campaign. HECI, in fact, my dear friends, will be the new CBI, ED, IT arm of BJP and ISS and RSS. In fact, HECI will be the arm that will arm twist and control the education lobby in this country to suit interests of BJP and communal RSS. It will make education non-viable for all OBCs, Dalits and marginalized sections in this country. Corporate Gurukul will evolve, and all Ekalavyas of OBC, Dalits and marginalized sections will suffer and will face extinction from all the corporate Gurukuls that BJP and RSS will implant in India. Let me come back to the third principle in national educational policy, friends: use of technology or digitalization of education. Let us look at the facts and figures of digital education in India. Only 8% of India's population have good internet connection and laptops or computers in this India. In a Bimaru state like Madhya Pradesh, only 8% of its population has access to internet and a laptop or a computer. We might boast of high mobile penetration, but how many citizens of India or students in India have access to 5G or high-speed internet in this country? What is the cost of high-speed internet in this country? Can students afford high-speed internet cost in this country? Today in COVID times, we are seeing the suffering that poor and marginalized students are facing on online education. Now, with this digitalization, I see a corporate conspiracy, and the Modi government is hell-bent on helping its corporate cronies to gain a foothold in the educational sector through national educational policy. Digital education was not part of the original draft of the NEP. In fact, according to sources, it was added at the last moment. In fact, on 1st May, Prime Minister Modi told that it will be an era of digital education. And why he told that, now we all have to understand. In fact, he said that digital education will be the core of NEP. It was only after this talk of Mr. Modi that at the last moment, digital education or digitalization of education found place in National Educational Policy 2020. When I ponder why, friends, a report says in the next 4 years, the online education industry will be nearly $15 billion, will be the market size of online education. Now, if you see for this last 10-15 days or for the past 1 month, Who are going to be the beneficiaries when education becomes digitalized? When you see, friends, recently, I think 10-15 days back, a lot of people, like companies like Google, Facebook, and other companies have invested heavily on Reliance Jio. In fact, Google has invested close to 15 to 20,000 crores for a stake in Jio platforms. Now, we all should understand, friends, why Modi is hell-bent on commercialization or privatization of the education industry in India. When you look at what happened in the DTH industry, earlier we used to pay 150-200 rupees for the cable connection. Today we are paying 350 to 500. Look at mobile internet. When Reliance Jio launched, we were paying 250 rupees for 3 months. On an average, we used to pay 100 rupees per month. Today, after people have got used to digitalization and internet, Reliance has increased its tariff from 250 to 300 rupees to 550 to 600 rupees today. Same thing will happen in commercialization or privatization in education through national educational policy. All the corporate cronies will benefit with this privatization, and instead of GER, where government says that through NEP, number of students into secondary and primary education will increase, higher education will increase from 23 to 24% to 50%, the reverse will happen. People from marginalized sections, especially OBC and Dalits, will not be able to pay the high fees for higher education. Neither is government clear that it is going to be spending from the budget or public spending will be happening to help the poorer sections and the marginalized sections in the national educational policy. That is why I say, friends, there is nothing clear in this national educational policy. You need to read not only the lines in the national educational policy, but you have to read between the lines or the empty spaces which are vacant to fill in the hidden agenda of this fascist and communal BJP government. While Modi and through his NEP speaks of Saman education niti or Saman Shiksha niti, it's not exactly Saman, it's not exactly equal, or it's not equity oriented. There is nowhere where this NEP tells that the 30 students per teacher norm will be uniform across. There is nowhere that the NEP says that the infrastructure will be common or uniform across poor and rich in this country. There is nowhere the NEP agrees with the Kothari Commission, which says that 6% of public spending from the GDP will be spent on education, or 10% of the annual budget will be spent on education. It only speaks of it also speaks of self-regulation for the corporate schools or institutes that will be mushrooming across the country. Self-regulation means the corporate educational society itself regulates itself, telling that we have so many OBC students, that we have so many staff, we have so many, we have provided so many scholarships, this will be the fees, etc. When self-regulation comes, my dear friends, all the regulatory bodies, that means the district BEO, the block educational officer or the district educational officer, will have no rights to be a regulatory authority of what is happening in these private institutions. Today, the government control or the department's control on all the corporate establishments will be null and void. Hence, my dear friends, NEP is not holistic. In fact, it says that, children from up to 5th standard, up to 5th grade will be taught in their own mother tongue or the local language. My dear friends, today, when most state governments like government of Bihar, government of Andhra Pradesh, government of Karnataka, and more government states are urging, are putting, their full time and energy on making their own government schools English medium, where they're giving exposure to the poor and marginalized students of the government schools to study in English. NEP, in fact, is a regressive step which takes this decade of students backwards. Today, when we are talking of globalization, we are talking of liberalization, we are talking of people beyond boundaries. Isn't this a regressive step? Who will fall prey, my dear friends? All those students from the marginalized sections will fall prey. In fact, it says that up to class 8, there will be a vocational training. Ultimately, what will happen, friends? The teacher will, instead of uplifting the marginalized sections to grow up to the level playing field of those students from the upper echelons of the society, will be forcing these students to take up vocational training. Instead of training the students, most of the teachers will be forcing the students to take up vocational trainings like being a welder, being a carpenter, being into the leather industry. In fact, we will be going back to the caste or Varna system, where we will be forcing people to undertake a certain menial jobs. In fact, my dear friends, this vocation at such young age will force children into work. In fact, it is a hidden agenda to push students of OBC, Dalit and marginalized sections into cheap labor, which will help this capitalist cronies of Modi, Ambani and Adanis to get cheap labor in India for their Skill India projects. My dear friends, NEP 2020 is looking like a party manifesto for Modi. He is telling a different story to us so that we all sleep after listening to a story. It's a document full of promises. Modi himself is not sure how he is going to implement it. We have seen all his jumlas. We have seen his 15 lakhs. We have seen his 2 crore jobs. I'm sure this NEP also will be one of his jumlas. This NEP doesn't at all explain how it will be implemented. Neither are resources for this implementation been clear. In fact, I have to tell you that in fact, Modi is trying to give this educational industry on a platter to his corporate cronies to make money. As you know, friends, if you look at the past 1-2 months of Reliance Jio especially, lot of foreign corporate big giants have got stake in Reliance Jio. Facebook and lot of investors have come in. One particular investment, that of Google, gives doubt. There is an iota of doubt comes to my mind that why Google has invested in Reliance Jio. Now let us connect why Google invests in Reliance. Do you know, in this COVID scare, lot of examinations also will be forced to be held online. And UGC recently has made examinations compulsory. If COVID goes on till April, May, 100% examinations have to be conducted online, and Google along with Reliance Jio will make thousands and thousands of crores due to this one decision of UGC. That is why, my dear friends, that I have a doubt on this new educational policy. While NEP talks of egalitarianism, equity, but in short, it is nothing but commercialization or privatization or industrialization of educational system in India. Dear friends, the PPP model in new educational policy is a roadmap for entry of Ambani and Adani into education system in India. CSS or common school system could have been the essence of new educational policy, but nowhere CSS has found place in the new educational policy. The NEP doesn't talk of it. BJP and RSS wants uniform civil code. They want one country, one language. They want one country, one culture. They want one country, one election. But they don't want one country, one schooling system for all of India, wherein all the children, irrespective of their caste, creed, class, whether they are rich or poor, get equal education in the system. Same education system, same infrastructure. Why can't they convert all the government schools into Kendriya Vidyalayas or Navodaya schools? Why didn't NEP tell about that? Why did NEP tell only about privatization or commercialization of education? Isn't this the hidden agenda of Modi and BJP government? That is why, my dear friends, I say national educational policy brings in unequal and non-inclusive educational system in this country. NEP, in short, bridges the nexus between corporate India and government to hijack the educational industry. NEP in fact ends up in deprivation of higher education for the marginalized sections such as OBC, Dalits, poorer sections in this country. And in fact, NEP nationalization in fact produces cheap labor for corporate India to make money through Skill India. Hence, my dear friends, I urge upon who has to fight this new educational policy. In fact, all the parties should come together, opposition parties should come together. That is on one side. But my dear friends, the intelligentsia, the students, the universities, even the teaching faculty who will be worst affected because there will be no permanent jobs. All the teachers will become slaves of Ambani and Adanis in this country. The farmers, the marginalized sections, the OBC, the Dalits have to come together and fight against this draconian national educational policy, which in fact is a boon for all corporate cronies of Modi, and in fact will be a bane for all the marginalized sections in India. Jai Hind.